with me as well, and I think you've done an excellent job, especially with your capability to responding to some of the tricky questions around Leifo Karika. So my question is very similar to Mrs. Mohi's around the environmental issues, in particular the gap that our residents raised in their submissions about recognising the impact of climate change. And I'm very grateful for those residents for noticing that gap and providing a submission on that, because protecting our future generations' environment that they'll be living in is of utmost importance. And as a leader of sustainability portfolio, I do think we could have had more in the spatial plan. So my question is, and it's really just around the wording in the report, that those issues noted would be passed on to relevant departments and organisations to be considered. And my question is that enough to be considered? I think we could be doing a lot more. I think there could be some more underlying representation within the spatial plan, and if not in there, can we as council have a finger on the pulse there to ensure that that carries on forward, because council will need to incorporate climate change implications into our urban development, land use decisions, long-term approaches to waste management and transport infrastructure, because in 30 years time, when I'm 55 and we see the results of the spatial plan, we would have failed if we didn't take our responsibility seriously to plan for and provide the infrastructure to avoid or reduce these risks and hazards that come from climate change, like the recent flooding events and the lake level rises. So again, to that question, are we doing enough, and how will council ensure we keep our finger on the pulse?
Kia ora.
Yes, so I completely agree with you, and there were a few submissions that we received on those points, and we're looking to incorporate some of that detail into the final spatial plan. So one of the recommendations for you to consider today is that we include those edits into the final spatial plan. What we're just looking at today are those key themes that we received multiple submissions on, but definitely there are lots of bits and pieces that we can change through that spatial plan to make sure that that's all incorporated in there. When we come back with a final plan, I'll make sure I pull out those bits to show you where those changes have been made.
Thank you. Your Worship, then Councillor Kent.
And great to hear Councillor Tapsell talk about the futures, and which is what this document is. My question to you was, when we held the Ree Anderson workshop, it was with mayors also at the Zone 2 meeting. We presented that with the mayors and the chair of regional council, and they were very interested themselves in pursuing the same methodology about the wider region. I haven't heard anything more happen on that, which is rather unfortunate, because I chaired the original Invest Bay of Plenty, which was the informatics hub, about what this district would look like and what the region would look like. And I just ask for that response. And the other statement that I want to make is that I certainly support option 2. The whole of our Vision 2030 and the underlying goals, and now the big moves of this generation and our upgrades to roading and infrastructure, as Councillor Tapsell mentioned, and also future subdivisions, is all aspirational, built on growth, that if we don't have that aspiration in option 2, we're going to be asking, or future council's going to be saying, we've got this growth and we haven't invested in being able to be ready for the growth that suddenly hit us. And there are many districts around us that have got exactly that problem right now. And we've actually shown a very moderate approach about our investment, I think, that has put us in really good stead. But if we don't hit that aspiration on option 2, then it won't be us worried around the table, probably only Councillor Tapsell in the future. So I don't think we have any other choice, especially with our story about the Rotorua way. It is built on growth, and it is built on real growth. And for those councillors that do come to citizenship ceremonies that we put in each month now instead of 6 weekly, we have net migration gain that has made up for a decade of migration loss. So it's here, and we have to plan for it. But my question about the wider region undertaking this methodology, because it was really enjoyable.
Madam Chair, we'll certainly go back through the Regional Council and just say, look, this is something that collectively the TLAs need to bring to the table with them to start taking that wider Bay of Plenty perspective. Smart growth has been around a long time and has received various updates. Obviously, with us finalising our plan, there's an important conversation about that labour mobility and pressures between the Western Bays and ourselves, and I understand that the Eastern Bay of Plenty was also looking at a spatial plan development process. So this might either help us work collectively to support Eastern Bays put in place a plan, or at least bring the three sub-regions together so we can fully understand those interdependencies. So I think it's important we keep championing the need for this from a Bay of Plenty, Central Plateau, Waikato approach as well.
Thank you. Councillor Kent, and then we'll go on to the Lake Okarika. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. I support the recommendation for option 2, and I think there's a very good explanation as to why we should go there in the Anderson report at the bottom of page 6, starting at the bottom of page 69. And the explanation that is there is precisely the reason why we need to go down the what-if major growth scenario. That's what long-term planning is all about. The spatial plan is long on growth aspirations, it's long on housing, location of industrial, long on iwi aspirations and fulfilling them, and so on. But it is extremely short in one particular area, and this has been highlighted also in the Lee Anderson report, and that is on the importance of farming and forestry to Rotorua's economy. And I don't see anywhere in the spatial plan a review of the impact on Rotorua's economy from the farming and forestry point of view, that the plans that we're putting forward as to where we're going to plonk housing and industrial areas, and I'm thinking very specifically an area that I have raised before, which is the area on Tinai Road adjacent to State Highway 30, which iwi have aspirations to develop into industrial, which is prime horticultural land, perfect for the raising of all these little seedlings that are going to be needed for these millions of acres of forestry that the government wants to plant. So I think we should be doing a review of the impact on the farming and forestry area as part of the spatial plan to make sure we're putting these things in the right place.
Madam Chair, I think the view, obviously we're trying to get to a decision making about the spatial plan, but I think the intent that Councillor Kent has raised about an ongoing analysis, I think is really valid, and we need to just do that as we take down the next step of saying, look, the implementation of it, the sector impacts, is some of that granularity, and ongoing work I think will be required, full stop, and I think that does fit into the wide economic development strategy for the district, and also into subsequent discussions around district plan stuff as well.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, team there, for a good presentation. I'll be supporting option 2 on the basis that if we look at Saturday's local newspapers, then yes, we on the growth and everything is hunky-dory. We are above the national growth line, but at the same time, we were cited as being a ghost town, which we are defying because we're keeping the foot on the throttle. I also hope that while we sort of look forward, we have a great debt plan to grow the city. However, at the same time, not try to grow and defy the decline by choking our ratepayers. We need a better.
Keep it relevant, please. Keep it relevant, please, to the discussion on the table.
Okay.
Thank you.
We got to look at better. We've got to look at medium-sized cities around the world like ours to see how we can be a better city. Are we getting New Zealand locals moving to Rotorua or migrants boosting that space? And lastly, I hope also whether we are not cutting back on sporting fields to build more housing.
Thank you, Councillor Kumar.
Are they, point of order, Madam Chair, are they spatial plan comments?
No.
No.
They're just, thank you for that, thank you. Thank you, Portia, if you'd like to continue with your, thank you.
Okay, so the second key strategic issue that was coming forward was the development that we indicated out at Lake Okaraka. And similar to what we were discussing before was that it was very hard to keep this conversation at a spatial plan level because the residents out there wanted to get into the detail. They wanted to know what this looked like, sizes, areas, locations, and that's not exactly what the spatial plan goes into. The spatial plan just says, hey, we've got potential growth areas, this could be one of them, and the reason for including it out at Lake Okaraka was to make sure that we were providing for those different housing types so that when people are moving home or relocating here, they've got those options depending on what their family needs are. So these are some of the key influences that were coming through as to why we put that growth area out there. And some of the key points that were coming through from some of the feedback. So there was some concerns around the natural hazards out there and the impact of the growth on the wetlands and bird life and lake water quality. There were questions around can we accommodate the population growth in other areas instead of out at Lake Okaraka. There was the potential impact on the natural character, the quality and the amenity of the area, and that was a lot of the comments in there were around the community, the impact on the village feel. There was the alignment with the Vision 2030 and the Rotorua Way. Was this actually the growth area out here actually aligning with the Rotorua Way and the purpose and principles of the LGA, and also a lot of people raised the Lakes A zone and the purpose as to why the Lakes A zone was put in place. So this is a lot of this is more detail that you'd probably go into around a district plan review rather than at a spatial plan, but I've brought some of this forward to try and answer some of the questions that were coming through. So you can see the site on the left is the site that we identified in the spatial plan. Now the spatial plan kept at a really high level. There were no real edges to it, but this is the site that was identified in the spatial plan. Now this site, under the current rules of the Lakes A zone, could accommodate up to 22 homes as of right. So what the Lakes A zone says is that on this site you can have one lot per 40 hectares, and on every lot you can have 2 homes. And if you divide this lot up into that, then you're looking at 22 homes on that site. But of course that would spread 22 homes across the entire site. So that's sort of a permitted baseline, or what could be allowed on that site in terms of numbers. Around the natural hazards, you can see there on the right the areas of soft ground. Yes, it does have some soft ground, but no more than what we're dealing with in a lot of other areas of Rotorua. So our city sits on soft ground as well. It just means that you need to make sure the engineering is done right. And when you go back to that diagram about the circles, when you start to look at it, it's around plan enabled, and then when it drops down to what's commercially feasible on this site, it might start to identify sites in which you'd naturally put homes. And of course this is a lot more detail as to what you'd expect to discuss in a spatial plan, but we're just covering off some of those key points that were brought forward. The landslide potential, there's not so much landslide potential on this site, and then also it's clear of fault lines as well. Judge Bollard's Environment Court decision that was made around the Lakes A zone when it was put in place, I think this is really important because what it says is that careful consideration must be afforded because of the environment's fragile nature. Okay, we all know this, and the ease with which the natural character of the areas can be altered. And these remarks do not mean to convey that a dead hand must be placed on the Tarawera lakes and their catchments, but what must be done is to analyse the degree of change that can be accommodated. So I think that's a really important comment that came through from that Lakes A zone when that was put in place. It's not saying that we're closing the door, that we just must make sure that growth is carefully considered in these areas.
Portia, may I ask, when was that handed down, that decision? I can't recall now. It was about 15 years ago, I think. Was that correct?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, that's right.
About 15, thank you.
Yeah.
That's right, thank you.
Also, with the alignment of the Vision 2030 is that it specifically says that Rotorua is something special and that we have the volcanic landscape, our lakes, our calderas, our geothermal features. And what Vision 2030 seeks to do is to drive those opportunities, enterprise and diversity, and make sure that one way of interpreting that is to make sure that we're protecting our natural areas, but also providing those opportunities as well in those housing types.
Madam Chair, Joy, the other thing I would just add, and it probably comes to this discussion about the recommended option, is that one of the other things that we looked at was proximity to the city. Remember, we were talking about what's an area that could be developed, and the access to current infrastructure. So obviously reticulated sewage, water, and the good roading to it. And that was one of the reasons why initially we had it identified as an area that was a now. And probably when we look back at the aspirational values of change that this plan sets out, that was really what's driven us to this point of saying, look, Lakes A Zone has those entrenched in them as well. They need to be looked at, and in that context, any future development really has to fit with what's in the district plan and what these aspirational objectives are of the spatial plan. And that was really why we've now got there a recommendation, which is to move it from a now to a next, which gives us the time to undertake that Lakes A Zone review and with a fuller view of the entire Lakes A Zone, but certainly that's the relief being proposed for those submitters who said no. We don't believe any development should occur at Lake Okaraka. So that's really the approach we've put forward in that space.
Thank you. And I think the judge's comments all those years ago are still as relevant today as they were then, and we've tended to obviously take those on board. So thank you. Now, Mr. Berryman-Kemp, thank you, Portia. Was there anything else further on that? Otherwise, we'll take some discussions.
No, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies. Obviously, what I'll do is bounce back to the question I had before. I actually thought you were done. So, yeah, just to summarise, understand the report, and I get that. Interested in how, and I think you've touched on it a little bit already, how the tension between the move from now to next may conflict with the spatial plan in terms of supporting iwi development and aspirations. Whether it's specific to this particular one or whether it's more of a precedent. That's probably what I'm quite interested in. And I have one other question, which again sort of bounces back. I honestly cannot for the life of me remember why it was specifically the Lake Okaraka section as opposed to other areas for development across town. I have a sneaking suspicion, and I sat in on the hearings, that it was because almost the entire population of Lake Okaraka came to present. Kapai, excellent. But I'm also interested in the learnings from this process for other areas for development. So 2 questions.
Okay, so just on your first question, is we have the current Lakes A Zone plan, which still exists and still has rules and regulations and allows for those iwi aspirations within the lakes zones, not just Okaraka but Tarawera as well. So that will still be available for those discussions around Papakainga and other iwi aspirations in those areas. The spatial plan doesn't say you can go ahead and do this right now. It says we need to have another conversation at a district plan level, and in that district plan review there can be a lot more detail and a lot more discussion with the community around what that potentially looks like. And I would suggest that that goes a little bit further around some of the rules as well. So some of the rules in the Lakes A zone, you know, after 10 or 15 years of it operating, are not necessarily working in some areas. They could be better, they could protect more, and they could also allow for more. And so, and following on from Judge Bullard's decision, is we can still achieve what we need to achieve while protecting the environment out there. So there's definitely that conversation that we can have in a Lakes A zone review out there.
Just adding to that too, and I think it was raised with the timing. If you recall, or I don't know how many people would have recalled, Lakes A zone was done, and it did take a significant amount of time, but it was completed before this present district plan review kicked off, and with the intention of saying, hey, it's only just been done, therefore it won't be part of the district plan review. However, it then took 10 odd years to go through the district plan review, and so actually it's about time we came back around to have another look at Lakes A zone. So that was always the intention. I think for us, the spatial plan exercise and discussions around Tarawera sewage schemes and the changes that have occurred over the last 10 years really make it important that we get on with that Lakes A zone review. And make sure now it fits within the context of what's happened more recently with the full district plan review. So timing wise, it's important that we do start taking those steps to review the Lakes A zone.
Yes, Your Worship.
Question really, and it came up at Green Drinks the other night, and a bit of a prompt. When you're looking, or when we will get into looking at the Lakes A review, there was discussion about ribbon development. And I may be wrong, but I always thought that meant around the lake margin, but they were almost implying there, or the understanding was it was along from the city out to the lake as ribbon development. So is that defined? Because there's a misunderstanding about it.
Madam Chair, to answer that, ribbon development is often referred to simply roadside development that you can see. So you have houses along a road, and in that sense it was Tarawera Road, that the fear was that the development would occur, it would be visible, and it would just be a stack of houses, whereas in fact the landscape and geography of the area would make that quite a challenge, even if it was zoned that. It's not zoned that, and there's nothing in our direction here to signal that any of that kind of development would occur.
Thank you for that. My question really was about, that's the lake zone, but we've also got some interactive zones or transitional zones. When we get to reviewing the Lakes A, do we look at those corridors into the Lakes A area?
I think yes, by necessity we would have to, but you know, I'm conscious that, for example, the Lakes A zone boundary runs close to the turn-off down to Okaraka. So if you're thinking about that line, you've got to go up past Linmore, up over the hill there. You arrive on the flats. You've got the Okaraka turn-off before you head down to Tikitapu. So that's sort of one of the boundary areas. So that concern about would you expect to see a thread of houses all the way to Tarawera is a legitimate concern, and it's not actually provided for in the zoning that we have at the moment. And I suspect from a landscape perspective, nor would we. So again, that would be something that would be a factor that would have to be built into that wider conversation about the Lakes A zone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Thomas, then Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few comments, and one thing I would say is that since we went out on the spatial plan, I think more than anywhere else, this discussion has continued around all the lakes, around what a spatial plan means for them. So I would hope that, just as Councillor Kent had mentioned, ongoing looking at the impact of farming and forestry in the area, that we could continue to have that discussion with lakes communities and more of a development around it, because the space for the lakes area was kind of just put underneath that playground heading, and I'm really pleased to see that there's a suggestion to remove that, because that wasn't just offensive to iwi, it was disturbing to all of us around the lakes, actually. Okaraka is different from the other lakes in that it is the lake with a permanent population. It has a high level of permanent residents there, whereas our other lakes have a lot more absentee owners. And so when we're out in the community talking about growth, that growth wasn't necessarily just new houses. It could be the change of houses from being a holiday batch to be a permanent home, and that allowed for expansion. I just want to say too that on the maps, having a blob on each lake caused a lot of problems for people, and I think that's where a lot of the issues for Okaraka popped up, because they saw that little blob on the map and they thought, major development there. At the same time, we had the other lakes saying, oh, but we're not mentioned, so that means you're going to sneak in major development there. So, it's a concern amongst all the lakes, and you will have seen stuff coming through from Tarawera as well on that issue. I look forward to us working through the Lakes A-Zone review, but I would hope that we would also have the wider spatial plan discussion at the same time as well, and talk about the aspirations of those communities and the aspirations of iwi, and I think that's particularly important with Okaraka and Tarawera, because iwi were displaced from there during the eruption, and there is a strong desire to return to the area, and that's a discussion that has to be had with the people living out there already, because it is a very valid aspiration, and those communities will have to come to terms or agreement on that. The other thing I would like to say is that we need to keep the other lakes in focus as well. The concerns around the natural landscape and the importance of those areas are maybe enshrined in the Lakes A-Zone legislation, but we have exactly the same need to protect our other lakes as well. They have different approaches to development or extra housing in the areas, but we do need to protect their unique environment as well. The last thing I would say, I would like to see, we are making the change from now to next. I would also like to see neighbourhood centre, which is marked on the maps, either removed or defined, because that was a lot of the problem for Lake Okaraka residents. They saw a neighbourhood centre and they imagined motion entertainment moving into the area. I see neighbourhood centre and I think of the Lake Tarawera Community Hall that we just discussed earlier on. So, it's a term that needs defining or removing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kent, and then Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Can you just give me some idea of what sort of time frame are we looking at to commence the Lakes A-Zone review?
Can I just say I'd be happy to accept an additional C there, that Council could recommend that be undertaken. So just saying to support you in that one, but thank you.
Madam Chair, I hadn't been able to, we haven't got a time frame specifically identified yet. I think that's something we'd like to bring back to through Henry towards the RMA Policy Committee. And the reason behind that is one of the things that we did once we brought in the district plan was start responding to some of those other issues. So obviously we've had plan changes around noise, plan changes around signage. There's been a couple of things that we've had to tidy up in advance rather than just rolling straight into a Lakes A-Zone. So I don't have the answer as yet for that, but I think that's something that we just need to work through as a RMA Policy Committee with Henry and his team as to when that should commence, because it's not a small piece of work, and I think picking up on Mr. Thomas's comments as well, It's important that we don't just see ourselves talking about 2 or 3 lakes. That's going to be one of the challenges, is all these lakes are special, all these lakes have very special characteristics, but we have one Lakes A zone which enshrines certain things around a few of them, but not the others, and I think this is a time for us to really look at the importance of all of the lakes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Councillor Hunt?
Thank you. I just support Mr Thomas's comment about language, because the spatial plan has no statutory weight, but it's called a plan, and our community knows the district plan does have statutory weight, our long-term plan has weight, our annual plan does, and so it's quite a challenge for them to see, and I can understand that an area that they think a neighbourhood centre or a large amount of development, that they've drawn it on the map, so it must happen. And I think that really it is about telling our story, and our city has always told a story. Many other cities haven't, but our city has always had a theme and a story, a deep cultural connection attached to it. And our spatial plan is an opportunity for those who live here and those who may choose to live here to actually get a feel for what that story is, to get a taste of where we're going. No one wants to wake up and find they're living in a death by cul-de-sac suburb. And we know we've got some of those on our neighbouring areas, coastal areas, where growth simply has run unchecked. There's no centre, there's no heart. They probably would love a neighbourhood centre given the opportunity, but there wasn't enough time to plan for those sorts of things. And I think that we do need to keep track of where the development is happening and where our hotspots are, and that overlay with this. But it is a high-level guide to say we are thinking about our future. We're looking ahead. We're not just looking to tomorrow or next week or the end of our long-term plan. And as councils, we've been quite remiss in actually forward-looking. We've forgotten about our younger members in our community, those who will be inheriting the decisions we make. We've simply gone on an election cycle and worked and picked things that actually suited us. So if we can remember that this is a guiding document and that it doesn't carry that weight, it is going to be open for changes and for improvements, but this is a really good start. So I fully support option 2 here in both instances of the projections as well as Lake Karaka, and know that a lot of those areas that have raised community awareness, it's great, because when we do the Lakes A zone review, we know we will have a very active community who are concerned about the changes that may come through that. To move, if I could, when the opportunity presents, Madam Chair.
Thank you, noted. Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to second that, but I'd like to include a point C for consideration. The point C should read that the spatial plan be reviewed with regard to importance of farming and forestry to Rotorua's economy.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, because thank you for that, Councillor Kent. That can, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure that needs to be in here at this point. I certainly think that we will look at that, but that's another whole piece of work which may well tie up the signing off of this particular piece of work. And there's a lot of economic development, I'm sure Councillor Donaldson's going to speak to that, where we do specifically address the farming and the I can't remember what the other thing you said was now. The farming and the forestry. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in response to that, it's a bit late if we approve a spatial plan that puts things in the wrong place because we haven't reviewed the farming and forestry impact. So I think we should be doing that first, personally.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Donaldson, you've got something to add to this one.
Yeah, I think the response from staff earlier, and I support where Councillor Kent's coming from, is that will be included under option 3, or under point 3 of the recommendation, that there will be commentary around a focus on farming and forestry relevant to the spatial plan. So I think I'd be happy if minor edits, including how the spatial plan aligns with farming and forestry, are included in that point 3, I think that might satisfy where we're coming from.
Madam Chair, I think what Councillor Donaldson has raised is actually will be helpful. I'm just sitting here thinking also that before the social plan is a guiding document, there is another level of planning detail that must follow before it can be implemented. So I'm sort of reflecting here and thinking we probably need to look at the economic path and impact around farming and forestry as a discrete piece of work. Now, when I'm thinking about plan changes, so before we would proceed to a plan change where the rubber hits the road and a piece of land which is currently zoned rural could be changed to an industrial commercial or something like that, that piece of information or a study on forestry and agricultural needs would have to form a basis of our environmental impact assessment or economic impact assessment that would go into a plan change discussion. So I think what you're signalling is a piece of work that needs to be done before the plan would be implemented, and I wonder if that's a way of simply highlighting in a C that in support of the spatial plan, some sort of economic assessment, or an economic assessment of the direction of farming and forestry needs to be undertaken, full stop. And really that gives us a core document that would enable us to make an evaluation before a plan change would come near fruition. And obviously a plan change would have to come through the RMA Policy Committee for consideration. So rather than sort of leaving the spatial plan in limbo, because I think the way it's worded there leaves it in limbo, it's actually saying yes, the plan is okay, and again, I take your indulgence on that statement, but there's 2 pieces of research we would like to see for the district which would inform subsequent implementation decisions. Sorry, that was a long way to get to. It's an important piece of work.
From what I think, thank you for that explanation. I just assumed that I got from Councillor Kent that he would like to see the importance of farming and forestry beefed up in the draft plan. That's what I think. That's what I thought, and I didn't. Am I wrong on that? I think so. That's, and it could be. It just requires some beefing up, if you excuse the expression.
Even if the intent to assess it economically is included in the draft spatial plan, then at least it's clearly setting that out right at the start, and I think that's what we should be doing.
Yes,
I think so, and we certainly. Sorry, that's good clarification, because we can easily make sure that that's signalled within the objective relating to the jobs, because they are incredibly important sectors to our overall employment and GDP.
Thank you, councillors. I'm just wondering about the zone. I'll get some advice here from Jeff, and it is around the zone, the Lakes A zone review. And I'm just wondering if we couldn't have perhaps something there that actually recommends that we undertake, because we're not undertaking. We're going to leave it to some stage in the future, and I think we should be looking to indicate that we will be undertaking a Lakes A zone review. Because we've just said there that going to be considered. I don't know, Jo, what do you think? I mean, a lot of it hinges on this review.
Through the chair, what you could do is to build in a requirement for staff to report back to the committee on the proposed time frame for the Lakes A zone review. Certainly within let's say by the end of this year. Calendar year. Yes,
so that we've got something to go by. Thank you for that. Ms Mohi?
Kia ora. Just in regards to that amendment, could we possibly amend the word economic to comprehensive assessment? I'm just a bit concerned we sort of stuck on the economic assessment, and there's more to life than that. So can we just replace the word economic with comprehensive? Kia ora.
We've just got to go back.
Go up to C.
Go up to C, thank you. Gina, can you just repeat that? It was just includes comprehensive assessment.
Comprehensive.
Rather than just the economic assessment. That's in C, Carol?
Singularly.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Gould?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that the Raukawa-Tait Council need a spatial plan, that's fine. I'm happy with 2A and 2B. Why doesn't 2C include tourism and service industries? Because the service industries have a lot to do with farming and forestry. And my other issue is that in one of your first slides you showed that you had 56 workshops, you had 449 people gave written feedback. I'd like to point out that that is less than 1% of the registered voters in Rotorua. So it was really not a high turnout, and I'd also like to point out that a number of people have given up giving feedback to the council over issues, and this particular issue is actually very, very important because they've given up issues. My neighbour, who's now a retired professional person, has over the years given lots and lots of feedback on the submission process, and he just feels that it's just a waste of time, and he's not the only person who feels like that.
Now, Councillor Gould, you can't assume that because people do not take the opportunity to take part in giving feedback that they've thrown their hands up in the air and said this is all hoo-ha. So I think you're making a big assumption there.
Okay, the spatial plan should also take into, one of the key issues with the spatial plan in the future of 30 years' time is jobs, roading and houses. And that is very, very important for the growth of Rotorua.
Yes, that's what the spatial plan is trying to look into the future, to make some predictions and guide us to where we hope that will take us there. So thank you. Now we've got a number of changes up there. Thank you for the deliberations on that one. I am going to now look up there and see where we've got. So we have Councillor Hunt. I remember you did say you were going to move, didn't you? Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm just looking up here to see where I'm at. Councillor Kent seconded. Thank you.
I'm happy with those, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now I better just make sure I've got all of them. No, it was Councillor Hunt. Thank you. Thank you. I'll have to read them off up there because mine have changed somewhat here. So thank you for that discussion. So I am going to. Oh, thank you. I've got a mover and a seconder, please. Yes, Councillor Hunt, moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Kent. Thank you. That the committee recommends to Council that the final spatial plan, A, includes more clarity as to why the high growth scenario was selected. That's option 2. B, that the growth area in Lake Raukawa-Tait is recategorised from now to next, and that growth potential is considered in the Lakes A zone review. Option 2. C, that any actual land use change arising from the spatial plan include a comprehensive assessment of farming and forestry impacts. Then 3, that the committee recommends to Council minor additions as per the report are included in the final spatial plan. 4, that the committee recommends to Council that a final spatial plan be created to include the recommendations above and presented to Council for adoption. And 5, that staff report back on timeframes for the Lakes A zone review by the end of the 2018 calendar year. It's been moved and seconded. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Thank you, carried. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute recess and then continue. Thank you.
interactions between council and the boards. Aside from that, there are a couple of other KPIs. First one around the library. I know we only have one KPI registered there. I'd like to see that we had some. We've got this very new, innovative library with its computer rooms upstairs and stuff like that, and I'd like to see KPIs around the uptake of those innovative practices and future innovations in the library. I'd like us to be pushing that to continue to be in innovations in that space. So I'd like to see some other KPIs rather than just the one that is put there at the moment. In terms of the planning section on timelines, I notice on the percent of consents for subdivisions, the KPIs are set at 25% being done within 15 days. Shouldn't we be putting a more realistic time in there for how long it takes to do a consent for a subdivision, and be looking at achieving that for a much higher percentage? So if it's going to take a month to do a subdivision, then perhaps that's what we should be aiming at, or if it's 6 weeks, or if it's, I mean, I don't know what the timeline is. So that's one question. The economic development, I was just a bit puzzled why all the years have been set at achieved already. So I wasn't quite sure what was happening there. And finally, on the aquatic centre, I noticed just on the last item there the satisfaction with the new Learn to Swim school. I know we don't have that yet, but I wonder why we need to set a baseline on that and then establish the KPIs. I think we could be putting our money where our mouth is and be looking at a percentage of satisfaction. We're looking at a percent of satisfaction on other areas at the aquatic centre under the new development. I think the Learn to Swim program is, in terms of the lakes area, the most important part of the aquatic centre, and we'd like to see a level of satisfaction being aimed for from the word go.
Thank you. Una, you might want to respond to some of the points.
Thank you. There's quite a number of things that you've listed there, Phil, and I won't go through each one of them. But since these were printed, the aquatic centre ones in particular have had targets put against them. We've been working with Rob Keithley and his team around that, and a number of the other ones that you've raised as well have been addressed through our review with audit. So when you see the document, the full LTP document coming out to yourselves, hopefully within the next week, you should be able to see those reflected through. Just in regards of the ones around the Te Tātou partnerships under community leadership, we have, in working with Gina Rangi, we have included some new measures in there around measuring partnerships. It doesn't specifically state out the partnership with Te Tātou. It was actually looking to cast that net wider in terms of all of our partnerships with various iwi groups and Te Tātou partnerships as part of that one. And the ones around the community board, the community boards, that's one for us to consider. We hadn't put that in, and I'm just not too sure at this stage around our timing of actually being in a position to add any more into this particular framework. That's not to say that we can't still do that kind of surveying and getting those responses through another surveying mechanism.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kemp. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, Rob. Sorry, Rob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to answer one of Mr. Thomas's suggestions there, in terms of the consents, the 15 working days, we're talking about measurement against statutory timeframes here.
Thank you, yes. Mr. Berryman-Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I have 4 questions, so I'll go through them. Actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll go through the 4 questions and then I'll step back with each one so that we have some context. Number one of the things that I noted when I went through and had a look at some of these was particularly with the new measures and the new baselines, the definitions used are actually quite important. And by way of example, and particularly focusing in on the Te Arawa partnerships, one, proportion of Māori groups who consider council to be a good partner. In terms of establishing a baseline there, I'm interested in how that baseline will be established, because my question is which groups, how will we directly engage with those groups, and also what's the definition of good. So that's one of the questions that I have. Under the actually, shall we do them one at a time, or else it'll be confusing?
Yes,
apologies. Page 83, attachment 1, at the bottom under community leadership.
And I don't know.
I'm actually just going to look over my shoulder and ask whether Gina might help us out with that one. She's helped in formulating the actual measure, and she'll be able to give us some more information there.
Kia ora tātou. The KPIs that are set out here don't specify the methodology for finding that information. One of the things we discussed internally as management was that obviously we wouldn't be doing this through a telephone survey. It'd probably be more likely to be sitting down with our iwi partners and asking them, what is it that you define as a good partner? That's a conversation that we have started already with Te Tatau earlier this year, asking around, what are the indicators of a good relationship? They aren't necessarily that we're always completely in agreement, but we should be able to have strong, robust discussions and be able to work out mutually agreed outcomes. So what are the indicators that tell us that we're doing well? That will help council to improve our performance and strengthen the relationship. So we've begun the discussions with the different groups around what their expectations are. I don't think that we're going to settle it with everybody immediately, but certainly something we're keen to finalise in discussion with the groups themselves, because then that helps us to perform better.
Yes, next one.
Kapai, thank you for that. My second question, I sense Gina's answer might be relevant to that one as well, but it's under the bilingual Rotorua again. The measure is percentage of residents who feel that Māori culture and te reo is appropriately recognised and visible in the city. Again, my question is, I guess my question is, what will the process be to define that down further? And I'm also particularly interested in the groups that will be asked that question, as I can appreciate within our community, certain groups will have certain interests, and one person's view of appropriate is another person's view of not done at all. So interested in how we do that, and whether or not the actual users of te reo, how they'll be incorporated into that measurement structure.
Thank you.
I've probably got an answer that probably goes across a lot of these questions instead of specific. We are about to go out and test the market in terms of a research company or a surveying company that can look at better ways of collecting this data. So we've got the measures, and we've got, in most places, an indicator or a target that we're looking to achieve. The actual how we'll go about that, we actually want to test the market on companies who can best assist us in providing this. And you will recall that currently a lot of the questions that we have in this performance management framework have been undertaken by the annual NRB survey. We all know the growing issues around the information and the actual results that gives us. So we are looking to go out very soon with a scope of works with these questions and measures, and then get a good methodology back on what would be the detailed questions that then deliver us being able to measure these targets and stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Madam Chair. And think about, I can roll my last two questions into one.
That'll be good.
Because, and effectively, they were linkage to the vision and linkage to our CCO's statement of intents, and also how we monitor those. Whilst I understand the categories that each of these performance measures are pulled within, and community leadership, arts and culture, get that, I would have thought it would have been more appropriate to tie it into the vision and the strategic objectives that we're trying to achieve, so that the measures link to that.
Me to start, and you can.
You start.
I'm going to start, and Jeff's going to finish this one off. Yes, I have. In the workshop, we started with a conversation around what we were looking to set out in trying to move our current performance management framework away from looking at, I guess, more technical stuff around the delivery of a service to how they actually relate to the outcomes. In that workshop, remember, we started off with looking at a new developing framework around how we measure Rotorua 2030 progress. And as that is still being worked through and developed, it's really then hard to be able to link your services in an outcome aspect as well. So we did talk in that workshop about this is almost an intermediary step at the moment. Our vision is to get towards when we're looking at our services or our groups of activities, how they do relate or show contribution towards those outcomes. I'm going to hand over to Jeff.
Through the chair. So first comment is that I think the measures that you're looking at today are a refinement of our previous set of measures that were sitting in the previous document. What you're seeing today is really fairly much where most councils are with respect to measurement. A lot of process measures, a lot of counting measures, and that's been very much shaped by the nature of the Local Government Act, the expectations of audit, and in a sense as well, what is it that we can actually validly or reliably at least measure. The problem is that I think that when you step away and trying to ask questions, well, are we actually measuring what it is that we're trying to achieve in the longer term through vision documents and so on? I think the answer is no at this particular point. The other thing that I would say, though, in adding to this, is that you know that the current government is changing the legislation to reintroduce a balanced view of the well-beings. So the government is moving to define outcomes effectively. Once we've got outcomes defined, then we'll be in a much better place to actually start building a measurement framework which looks ahead and says, what are we trying to achieve? And then builds measures that align to that in terms of lag and lead indicators and all of those sort of components of a good measurement system. The problem, though, where we are today is we're not there yet. We're still back into a position where we have been for some time in the last LTP document of measuring largely process-driven indicators. The movement to outcome-based assessment and measurement will actually be driven very much by a national change with the new well-beings, and I understand that in fact I think it's Treasury that are currently working on measures around new measures, potentially around outcomes, which we would be looking to actually then try and adopt and scaffold measures which allowed us to assess, are we making progress towards these outcomes? So this is a bit of a transition point, I think, for us.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And so that was your, right, Your Worship. Thank you.
I'm awfully glad to get that explanation, and if we'd have got that up front, I think we'd have stopped diving into wanting to measure more stuff.
Yes.
We'd have actually said, are we making a blind bit of difference, and is Vision 2030 delivering? and how do we measure that? So I'm pleased to see it. I can accept that this is what is required by audit. It's awfully boring, but to a lot of people, when you look at perhaps levels of service about the recent flooding, for example, thinking that their stormwater drain wasn't cleared is the reason why, 48 homes went under, is the sort of question about resilience, and are we building resilience into our network and how are we servicing it? And I think I want to see an entirely new set of measures. Yeah. I find these, while it's the old way of measuring council, it really doesn't give me comfort that yes, we're making a difference, and yes, more investors are coming in, and yes, we're, like the GDP. That's all very well, but we want to know the bigger issues about people's lives. So thank you for that explanation. I'll accept this for what it is. I want to see innovation being measured too, rather than the number of library books being delivered. Yeah.
That's true. And are we making a difference in the lives of our citizens? Very true. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to question the measurement of system adequacy under the stormwater operations. That's on page 94. It would seem to me that, for example, the number of flooding events that occur in the territorial district being kept to less than or equal to 2 is a ridiculous measurement and a total waste of paper and time. Secondly, for each flooding event, the number of habitable floors affected, expressed per 1,000 properties connected to the Territorial Authority's stormwater system, is kept to below 0.5 per 1,000 rated. Well, if we've got 20,000 rated properties, we're talking about flooding 10 houses every time we have a storm event. That's not adequacy of our system at all. That's inadequacy of our system. So I think these two areas need to be looked at quite seriously.
Thank you. Mrs. Trumper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just got a couple of things I wish to support Mr. Thomas's comment about the boards being absent from this document, and I know that we both measured it and mentioned it, at the LTP Forum workshop, and we both expressed the reasons why we felt we should be part of the document. And I suppose my biggest point of, apart from a few minor issues here, there is nothing non-urban considered in this plan, and that is a real concern. You've brought on the community boards to be the voice for their community, and yet we are not considered in this document. Now, the main one, obviously, for me, is roads and footpaths. You're talking about the percentage of sealed and the condition, etc., etc. There is nothing in here about the maintenance programs that should be mandatory for our unsealed roads. Now, anybody in the rural community will tell you, if they live on an unsealed road, that they are more than happy if they get their road maintained to a reasonably good standard. And that isn't happening, and that I know is not the fault of the infrastructure team because their budget is only so big, but I think councillors have a responsibility to ensure that not only is there sufficient funds to meet the needs of the community, and yes, we're well aware that weather events make roads quite difficult to maintain on a regular basis, but I can assure you that the roads in the rural community are not being maintained as we would expect. And so that was my biggest issue around the roads and footpaths, is that there is absolutely no measurement for the maintenance of. And a couple of other small points. For the aquatic centre, I was quite surprised that there was absolutely no growth in utilisation. I was quite surprised that it stuck at one figure right across from the current target right through to 2028. I would have hoped we would have had better aspirations than that. And the other one was around the airport utilisation. And a recent event. I travelled to Christchurch and I flew direct from Rotorua to Christchurch, and a number of people that are attending the same event actually drove to Auckland, and I questioned why. In myself, I didn't ask them why they actually drove to Auckland, but we need to figure out how we can actually stop people from driving to Auckland to fly direct to Christchurch when we have our own perfectly good airport and facilities to cater for that. But that was really the main point, was the roads. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments, Mrs. Trumper, and also for reminding us that the Community Board and the Lakes Board are not invisible, and shouldn't be invisible. You should see yourselves represented in some of these areas. I think that's a good reminder. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to carry on, but your points are noted. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just a couple of quick responses to our two board chairs. In the economic development area, the airport company has just taken on a part-time consultant to work on route design and development, and the growth on the Christchurch route is continuing and is something that they're working on. Just in terms of Mr. Thomas's comment about the two measures of GDP and business confidence already being achieved, achieved is the target. So the target goes back to the measure. If we're above the average, we've achieved. It'd probably be a lot less confusing if we drop the D off achieved and the target is to achieve rather than achieved. But it's just a bit of clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the airport and with the comments with Mark from the Chief Executive of the airport made last week, the flight numbers, passenger numbers should increase 242,664 every year, yet it stays pretty stagnant in that particular report. The other problem is with roads and footpaths, response time of 5 working days. It's not achievable. A lot of people do phone up and report faults and they can't be fixed in that particular period of time. And I'm talking also about the rural community as well, particularly Raukawa-Tait roads at the present time. The sewerage response time of 180 minutes, that relates to 3 hours, and we've had 8 reasonable storms in the last 14, 15 months, and there's no way during those particular storms that you can go out and fix or work out a fault to fix those particular problems in a 3-hour period. So I think some comment should be made about storms or cyclones or something which can't be achieved because of climate change. That's totally impossible.
I think because of the severity.
I'll give you an example like Robertson Street during the 29th of April. The resident phoned up, complained and got nowhere. He sent a letter. That's just one example. Plus we've got Western Road. You've got all those people affected there.
And on the other side, we've had many people who are absolutely very grateful and supportive of what the council did. So, there's in any significant event, there's a heavy workload that just keeps piling up one after the other, and you know that they do the best that they can. But thank you for those comments, Councillor Gould. Sorry? Yes, certainly.
I'd just like to add to that one. These are measures and targets which we are looking to achieve. Remember, we report on these back to yourselves on a quarterly basis, and in that's that measuring of progress, and when events like we've had happen, we are able to report why these targets aren't on track or are a little bit behind, but it also provides us a mechanism to then put in place mitigation plans to be able to get back on track. And so that's one of the reasons why we do measure and report this back to you on a regular basis. So I just want to make it clear that these are a set of measures and targets which we aim to achieve. And then you've got that report back cycle of coming back to you and showing the measure of progress. Ms Muhi?
Kia ora. There's probably just 2 points. In regards to the compliance around sewage and or the sewage and sewage, I just wanted to just pick up on the 29th of October, April event, and a item that was raised in the flood debrief process that I haven't actually heard come past that meeting, which I think it's important to go on record, was the historical compliance issues been having up at the landfill, or with the old dump, and how the innovative response that the staff had up there during that event were able to avoid that occurring during that event, how they recirculated the leachate back into the site so that it wouldn't overload and exceed compliance. And I think it's really important that that goes on record, and that the staff are acknowledged for that, because council got a bit of a hammering and are going through a legal process as a result. So I just wanted to make sure that that's on record, and that those staff are recognised for that. I think that's really on to it. My second point is I just want to support what our board members, our rural community board members are saying, particularly around the absence, and I'm pretty gutted I didn't pick that up, that the rural community is missing from this process. And so I support what you're saying, Mrs. Trumper, and I'd just like to add, on top of roading and footpaths, there's a couple of other issues I think we should chuck in there, and that's street lighting and public waste collection, which are two things we do not have in Oahu. So not just Oahu, I know, Modi, other little communities, particularly the Lake Settlement communities, don't have. So I'd just like to tautoko your tono. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to pick up on the comments from Mr. Thomas, Mrs. Trumper and Mrs. Markey concerning what appears to be a complaint at a lack of measurements of KPIs for board performance. And I'd like to point out that what we're actually measuring here is staff performance completing the directions that have been set by the council and by board members. Thankfully, we are not measuring the performance of councillors or board members.
Now that would raise some issues. Thank you for that. And you're right, this is about staff performance, and hoping we're making a difference with the services that are being provided. Thank you for that discussion, councillors. Thank you. Where am I? Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report? Oh, sorry. May I have a... Where am I? There you are. Move and second for the following motion, that the committee recommends to council to approve the non-financial key performance indicators be included in the final development of the long-term plan 2018 to 2028. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Kent. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you, carried. Now we're going to go into public excluded. Yes, that's right. We are going to go into a public excluded now. Now I can just read these ones out. Yeah. To adopt the confidential minutes of the previous meeting, and to consider 2 contract reports for extension of local roading network management and also minor stormwater works 2018 to 2021, and also to consider the urgent item that was raised earlier at the start of the meeting. So the reason for that is that we're going into the public excluded is to enable any local authority holding the information to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations, and also to protect information where the making available of the information would likely unreasonably prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied or who is the subject of the information. So I would like a mover and a seconder, please, that the committee move into public excluded. Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Kemp. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you, carried.